variation in input refers to the differences in type of language exposure children receive. Instead of hearing one consistent form of language, they may hear different accents, dialects, or even multiple languages, depending on their environment. Children exposure to multiple languages or dialects may initially mix them up, which can seem like confusion for them. However, over time, they learn to separate the languages. So the issue there is children may mix languages or systems at first, leading to confusion. So when input is split between two or more languages, children may take longer to become fully fluent in one language compared to monolingual children. Let's move on to the lack of negative evidence. It means that explicit correction when child makes a mistake in speaking, for example, wrong grammar or wrong word use. The issue is that in first language acquisition, children rarely receive this kind of correction from parents or caregivers, because parents rarely correct grammar mistakes and usually focus on correcting meaning. For example, if a child says, "I goed," it is not correct, right? But parents don't always correct it. This raises the question, how do children learn correct grammar without direct correction? This relates to the poverty of stimulus argument in linguistics. And the main focus issue there is raises the question of how children learn to avoid errors when correction is minimal. So in first language acquisition, one big puzzle is that children make many mistakes, of course, but caregivers or parents rarely correct them. Despite, children still end up speaking fluently and grammatically correct as they grow. For example, "he don't like it" instead of "he doesn't like it." Parents often don't directly correct grammar. Instead, they usually focus on the meaning of what the child says. If the correction is rare, again, we can always ask the question, how do children stop making these mistakes? Now let's discuss the issues in discourse. The issues in discourse first is the turn taking in conversation. Turn taking in conversation, children must learn when to speak and when to listen. So in FLA, children must learn the basic conversational rule of turn taking, knowing when to speak, when to pause, and when to listen. This is not an automatic skill. It develops gradually as children observe and interact with caregivers and peers. So the issue there is difficulty in managing turns may delay effective communication. If children struggle with recognizing cues such as pauses, intonation changes, or eye contact, they may interrupt too often or fail to respond in time, which slows their ability to engage in meaningful conversation. Poor turn-taking can lead to misunderstandings with peers, making it harder for children to join group play or classroom discussions. Those are the issues of turn-taking in conversation. Now let's move on to the pragmatic use of language. It refers to using language appropriately. For example, requests, politeness, and indirect meaning. So pragmatics it refers to how language is used appropriately in context. For example, children must learn how to make polite requests, how to change tone depending on the situation, and how to understand indirect language. Pragmatic skills are the social rules of language use, knowing how, when, and why to use language appropriately in different contexts. Include skills like using polite forms, adjusting speech for the listener, and understanding verbal cues. If children do not yet master pragmatic rules, their speech may sound rude, inappropriate, and confusing to others, even if their grammar is correct. Struggles with pragmatics can delay social communication skills, making it difficult for children to participate in group activities, storytelling, or classroom discourse. Now let's move on to narrative skills. It refers to the ability to tell, understand, and retell stories or events in a clear, organized, and meaningful way. Storytelling requires sequencing events, connecting ideas, and considering the listener's perspective. So children often start with simple, disconnected statements before they can form clear and coherent stories. Children who have fewer opportunities to engage in conversations, storytelling, or discussions may struggle with organizing ideas into a clear beginning, middle, and end. Without regular participation in conversations and storytelling, children may have weaker narrative development, which affects not only their language growth, but also their social confidence and academic success. Now let's proceed to the dependence on context. It refers to how much understanding of language or communication relies on the situation, background knowledge, shared experiences, or social setting. So early on, children rely heavily on gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice to understand and be understood. The challenge is moving from these concrete context-based forms of communication to more abstract and purely linguistic expressions. So the issue there is that transitioning to more abstract linguistic forms can be challenging, right? Because, for example, here, I have an example. In concrete stage, early, they will say, I see dog. Dog is big. But in more abstract, dogs are loyal animals. They can be both pets and protectors. Now, the second example requires generalization and abstraction, which are harder for children to master. That's why transitioning to more abstract linguistic forms can be challenging, because transitioning from concrete to abstract language is a natural but challenging stage in first language acquisition. Without sufficient cognitive readiness, discourse practice, and cultural support, children may struggle to develop the advanced linguistic skills needed for reasoning, storytelling, and academic success. Now let's move on to cultural variation in discourse. It refers to the differences in communication styles, norms, and patterns of interaction across cultures. Because different cultures have different communication styles, right? For example, some encourage children to speak directly, while others value silence and indirect communication. This can create problems when children encounter discourse patterns in school that differ from what they learn at home. So the issue there is that children may face confusion when at home and at school discourse styles differ. So a child used to informal conversational speech at home, for example, short answers, reliance, and shared context, may struggle when asked to produce longer, more structured responses at school. So the pragmatic conflicts is that at home, interrupting or speaking out of turn may be acceptable, but in classroom, this could be seen as disruptive. Conversely, children from cultures that value silence and respect may appear too quiet in schools that expect active participation. Without guidance, children may feel confused about which discourse styles to use and when. Now, in first language acquisition, input issues concern the amount, quality, and type of language children hear, while discourse issues involve how they use language socially through turn-taking, pragmatics, storytelling, and cultural adaptation. Input builds vocabulary, grammar, while discourse practice develops effective communication. So, input and discourse together, these two factors shape each child's first language acquisition. Thank you.